There has never been as popular of a video on RealAgriculture.com as the interview that we did with Keith Wilson back in December on Bill 36. We had many emails and comments on the site regarding Bill 36. One of the things was we tried to get the government's response to the bill, but basically no response back from the government. I had a couple phone calls, but never could get an interview from anyone. That includes Minister Mel Knight to sort of rebut what Edmonton lawyer Keith Wilson was saying. And that still continues today. So I thought, get a Bill 36 update. What I do is once again talk to Keith. I know that he met with Minister Mel Knight, Mr. Mel Knight today, and I thought we get an update where things were at with the legislation, if there was any changes that were going to be coming, because this has obviously become a hot button topic, and RealAgriculture.com was definitely a part of that. That video received over 7,000 views. So once again, here's my interview today with Keith Wilson. So Keith, we haven't talked since December. A lot has happened with the Land Stewardship Act. Give us a bit of an update. You had a big meeting today with Mel Knight, the minister. Where are we at?
Well, since we spoke last, Sean, there's been tremendous interest throughout rural Alberta. I've been asked to speak at a total of 26 meetings now. It's been a little exhausting, but people are really coming to understand what the implications of not only Bill 36, the Land Stewardship Act, but some of its companion bills, Bills 19, 50, and 24. But surprisingly, I received a request from Minister Mel Knight that I come down to the legislature and meet with him about the Land Stewardship Act. That happened today. It was interesting, I guess, because his focus was on talking about the policy of the legislation, and I pointed out to him, I don't know that anybody's been critical of the idea of doing better planning and wise stewardship and conservation. I explained to him what's concerning farmers and ranchers and business people throughout the province is the broad powers that the government's given itself, and concentrating decision-making in the cabinet, removing appeal and court rights and compensation and so on. So he then moved to a discussion about the amendments.
Okay. So are we going to see some changes then, do you think?
Well, he didn't give me the copy of the proposed changes to the legislation until the very last minutes of the meeting, and he gave it to me and said I could look at it on my own time, and it's in the public domain. So I'll email you, and you can post them up on your website if you'd like, because they are in the public domain now. He did tell me, though, that they felt that they had made some important changes. For example, he indicated that they're making it clear that the cabinet cannot extinguish a land title. They're changing the word extinguish and replacing it with rescind. Now, that doesn't legally, rescind is a softer word, but it still means the same as extinguish. They take it away. And I said that was good, and I was encouraged by that, but I pointed out to him that it's concerning to people in Alberta that they have given themselves the power at the cabinet's discretion, whenever the cabinet wants, to rescind, use the new word, a water license. We know how critical those are to southern Alberta and our economy and food processing and primary production and so on. I said it's concerning to Albertans that they now have given themselves the power to rescind forestry management agreements, timber harvest agreements, oil and gas leases, oil sands leases, mining leases, development rights, and just simply saying, oh, we've changed the law so that we can't take your land title. Well, that's a good step, but what about all these other things? And it was his view that this was the appropriate level of authority for the cabinet to have.
So do you think farmers and ranchers should be, I know you haven't had a chance to probably go through all the amendments yet, but do you think farmers and ranchers in Alberta are going to be happy with the changes or demanding more?
Well, I think the fundamental point is that when you look at the four pieces of legislation together, they all have the same characteristics. They're concentrating in cabinet unprecedented powers. They're reducing substantive or procedural rights or entitlements of landowners, ranchers, and business people who use the land and natural resources to make their living. They clearly have a disdain for the courts in terms of being a check and balance. We had a long discussion about that. He said to me that, they believe in political accountability, and I said, that just moves us away from this whole rule of law principle that is a hallmark of a democracy. It's one of our freedoms, as I've said before. So they seem to be trying to respond to some of the concerns. I'll have a better sense tomorrow. I'm going to review the legislation in detail tonight. I did learn just as I was leaving the legislature this afternoon that the amendments are going to be introduced in the legislature tomorrow. And so they'll be available for everyone to see in every form. But I'll be reviewing them tonight and getting a sense, and I'll be able to provide a more informed comment. I'm suspicious, though, that they're not understanding the underlying problem that they've created by concentrating so much power in the cabinet. And I asked the minister, I said, has this been tried anywhere else? Because you've heard me say, Sean, and I've said this in public meetings, that I can't find anywhere that it has in the Western democracy. And said, well, they're trying something similar to it in Oregon, but nowhere else. I pointed out to him with due respect that no, there's features of this level of planning, a small group of politicians in a cabinet room in this capital city making all land use and decisions regarding all activities on all private and public lands throughout the entirety of the province. That's central planning, and it's been tried in Eastern Europe. I pointed that out to him. I told him it was a failure there, it will be a failure here, and they need to rethink the model completely. So I pleaded with him to do that, as well as look at the other legislation that's problematic. So we'll see what the amendments say in detail, and I guess we'll see what they have to say on the other bills as well.
Well, there's a lot of politics that have been attached to this whole issue. I'm not RealAgriculture.com is not a political website at all, but I've been just based on one interview that you and I had. I've been accused of being a wild rose honk, I guess, or spreading the message, which hasn't been true at all. There's some funny things that have happened. One of them is that it seems like the NDP has been speaking out against these bills as well.
In fact, the NDP has issued a brochure. They've issued a letter in the weekly newspapers. The NDP, in fact, is and good for them. I mean, come out very strongly saying that this is bad legislation, that all of these bills need to be repealed. They're saying the same thing as the wild rose. And in fact, they're accusing the wild rose of being Johnny lately. So I guess I've been accused of the same thing, Sean. So I don't know whether you and I are NDP sympathizers now, or whether we're wild rose sympathizers.
Well, that would be the first time I would be accused of that. That's fine.
Yeah, well, but I think what this illustrates is the fundamentals of these laws are so bad that parties on opposite sides of the political spectrum see how bad they are and feel the need to publicly call for their repeal. That is profoundly significant in my view.
Yeah, or they're looking at this as like, who the heck wants to stand behind the government on this one? They're getting hammered. We got to be on the other side of this discussion. But yourself, I know I had some emails coming from people saying, Keith he's saying this because he works for the Wild Rose and is is big time affiliated with them. You've had some, I guess, announcements in your career that are going on as well.
Well, nobody's paying me to do this. My accountant and my wife can attest to that. Let's get that cleared up. I've been volunteering my time. Yes, I get odd donations. Somebody will pass a hat at some of the meetings. And the odd meeting will be sponsored. I had one that was sponsored by a local fertilizer supplier company and a feedlot owner. But nobody's paying me to do this. I joined several months ago or last year. I went to a local Wild Rose meeting in my hometown in St. Albert, and if you've ever gone to a meeting like that, if you don't leave early, you end up with a position, and I ended up being on the board. It was one night a month, or every second month I went to a meeting. But I stepped down from that board. I resigned from it just because it was creating too much perception of bias or whatever. Anybody who's seen my presentation will know how careful I am to be nonpartisan and not endorse any one party. Am I critical of the government's legislation? Absolutely, but with good reason. But I don't say go vote this way or that way. More recently, I've been doing work with the Canadian Association of Energy Petroleum Landowners, which is the national landowner organization advocating for on behalf of landowners, and I've accepted the position of the chair of the Alberta chair of their policy advisory group and to be their Alberta spokesman. This issue's just become far bigger than me, and I just need the resources of that organization, and our interests align. I've volunteered a lot for them in the past. They've done good work in trying to help advance landowner interests and farmer and rancher interests with respect to land use issues. So it was a good fit, and I think we've got a long fight in front of us here. I don't think this is going to be over anytime soon. So,
well, and I think I know I was getting a lot of emails when our first interview. It's over 7,000 views at this point. When that first came out, I was getting emails from a lot of our viewers from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, places in the U.S. saying, I am fearful of this kind of stuff happening where I live. So I think overall it is a big concern outside of Alberta as well, not just inside the boundaries of Alberta.
And I can give you a really example of why people react that way. In Ontario, they've brought in legislation that allows restrictions to be placed on your property so that others can preserve their viewscapes, what they're looking at, their vista. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's mentioned in the Land Use Framework Regional Planning as one of the goals is to preserve viewscapes. So, people say, what? That they're going to control my use on my land so that someone else can drive down the road and look at what they've been looking at before. What has this country become kind of thinking. So what's encouraging is that people are educating themselves, they're reading the legislation, they're coming out to meetings to become informed, and they're sending the message to their politicians that this has got to change. And eventually, I think that will succeed. This is bad policy. It's bad law, and I'm encouraged by the response across the province.
Well, Keith, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll be getting more updates in the future, and thanks for making some time for us.
You're welcome, and let's stay in touch, and I'd be happy to update you as events unfold.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.